Walk down LaSalle Street in the heart of Chicago's financial district, and the city feels solid, immutable, and permanent. The massive granite and limestone towers of modern commerce rise hundreds of feet into the sky, anchored deep within the Illinois bedrock. But if you stop on a typical concrete sidewalk and look closely at the iron and steel ventilation grates running along the building foundations, a strange contradiction emerges. Peer through the dusty metal bars, down into the dark, narrow voids that separate the active street from the basements below. If your eyes adjust to the shadows, you will notice something that does not belong in a subterranean utility trench. Visible in the dim light, several feet below the modern pavement, sits a fully finished, ornate stone window frame. It features meticulously carved arches, polished limestone sills, and a decorative molding designed to catch the afternoon sun. Yet, here it remains, buried in the dark, looking out into a hollow concrete vault. This is not a rough basement window built for utility. It is the top of a grand first-floor entryway designed for a bustling street level that no longer exists. Why does the physical architecture of one of America's greatest metropolises feature its original ground floors buried in absolute darkness beneath our feet? The standard explanation in local history guides is simple. The city was raised to install sewers. But this neat administrative answer obscures a far more radical, chaotic, and human story. To understand why these windows are down there, we must travel backward into the mid-19th century, to a time when Chicago was not a stone metropolis, but a young, muddy, and desperate frontier boomtown, clawing for survival on the edge of a vast, flat marsh. When you stand on LaSalle Street today, you are standing on a massive, artificial platform built directly on top of their world. To trace the origin of this platform, we must search the historical record for the moment the Earth itself became the city's greatest enemy. In the early 1850s, Chicago was growing at a speed that terrified European observers. Rail lines were converging on the southern tip of Lake Michigan, grain elevators were rising along the river, and thousands of settlers were arriving weekly. But the city had a fundamental geographic flaw. It was built on a low-lying, swampy prairie that sat barely 2 feet above the water level of the lake. There was no natural slope, no drainage, and no way for water to run off the flat land. When the spring rains arrived, the streets of the business district turned into a vast, stagnant sea of black prairie clay and liquid mud. Contemporary accounts describe carriages sinking to their axles and horses drowning in the middle of Lake Street. Signboards were placed in the worst mires, warning pedestrians with satirical messages like, "No bottom here." But the mud was not merely an inconvenience, it was a lethal biological hazard. Without drainage, the city's waste, animal carcasses, and raw sewage accumulated in stagnant pools in the middle of residential neighborhoods, eventually seeping into the shallow wells that provided the city's drinking water. In 1849, and again in 1854, cholera swept through Chicago. The epidemic of 1854 was particularly devastating, claiming the lives of nearly 6% of the city's inhabitants in a matter of weeks. The city was sinking into its own waste, and its leaders realized that if they could not find a way to drain the land, the young metropolis would choke on its own growth. Travelers described the city as a chaos of mud and packing boxes, noting that the buildings seemed to float on a liquid surface rather than stand on solid earth. This was the environment that forced a radical reevaluation of the city's future. Either find a way to drain the swamp or watch the promise of Chicago collapse. In 1855, the desperate city council took a decisive step. they created the board of sewerage commissioners and hired a brilliant, self-taught engineer named Ellis S. Chesbrough to design the first comprehensive municipal sewer system in the United States. Chesbrough traveled to Europe to study how older capitals managed urban waste, but when he returned to Chicago, he faced a physical problem that European cities did not have: gravity. A functional sewer system requires slope. To carry waste away from homes and businesses to a central outlet, the sewer pipes must run downhill. But Chicago was flat, and digging deep trenches below the water table was impossible because the swampy soil would immediately collapse and fill with water. Chesbrough proposed a solution that was so audacious, so structurally counterintuitive, that many contemporary observers declared it madness. He decided that if he could not dig down to create a slope, he would lay the heavy brick sewer mains directly on top of the existing muddy streets, and then cover them with millions of tons of earth, raising the physical level of the streets by 4 to 14 feet across the entire central business district. The municipal authorities approved Chesbrough's grade lines in 1855 and 1857, but the immediate consequence was a political and legal deadlock. While the city possessed the authority to raise the public streets, it did not have the funds or the legal right to lift the thousands of privately owned brick and wooden buildings lining those streets. Property owners suddenly realized that the city was about to bury their active storefronts, turning their pristine first-floor retail spaces into dark, damp basements, and leaving their second-story windows at the level of the new, raised sidewalks. The debate inside the council chamber was fierce and bitter, with landowners arguing that the grade changes would destroy property values, but public health concerns eventually broke the deadlock. The city was at a standstill, but where municipal planning hesitated, private, Gilded Age ambition stepped in. Property owners realized they had to choose: let their buildings be buried in dirt or find a way to lift them. This crisis gave birth to a new, highly specialized industry of building movers and lifters. In the late 1850s, a young inventor named George Pullman arrived in Chicago, bringing with him a mechanical system that would redefine what 19th century engineering was considered capable of. Pullman's system relied on the simple, ancient physics of the cast-iron screwjack. Laborers excavated beneath the foundations, inserting heavy timber beams through the lower walls to support the weight, placing thousands of individual iron jacks beneath them. In 1858, Pullman partnered with contractors Lane and Ely to execute the most daring lift yet attempted: the elevation of the Tremont House, a luxurious 4-story brick hotel weighing over 20,000 tons. Pullman deployed over 5,000 synchronized screwjacks and hired a crew of several hundred men. The coordination was purely rhythmic. At the sound of a foreman's whistle, each worker standing in the dark crawl spaces beneath the building turned his assigned jack exactly 1/2 rotation, lifting the entire structure by a fraction of an inch. Turn by turn, the timber cribbing was built up, and the massive brick walls rose. The physical tension inside the crawl spaces must have been immense, as the creak of timber and the groan of iron holding 20,000 tons of masonry echoed through the dark. Yet the brick did not crack. The glass did not shatter, and the building rose slowly, steadily above the rising tide of mud. Pullman's success with the Tremont House established a new standard of structural engineering, proving that even the heaviest masonry buildings could be manipulated in mid-air. The engineering was remarkable, but the lived experience of the citizens who navigated this transition was truly surreal. As you walked down Lake Street or Dearborn in 1860, you were not walking through a standard construction site. You were walking through a city in suspension. While the Tremont House was being lifted, it did not close its doors. Guests continued to check in and out. Diners ate their meals in the grand dining room, and patrons slept in their beds, completely oblivious to the fact that they were hovering several feet above the ground. Merchants running dry goods stores along Lake Street ran advertisements boasting that business was active during elevation, using the physical lift as a marketing novelty. But for the average pedestrian, the streetscape was a chaotic, tiered obstacle course. Because the lifting was entirely funded and coordinated by individual property owners, it occurred in a patchwork fashion. One building might be raised 10 feet, while its immediate neighbor remained at the original swamp level, and a third was lifted only halfway. To bridge these massive physical gaps, the city was filled with a temporary network of wooden ladders, steep staircases, and rickety boardwalks suspended over deep, muddy chasms. Pedestrians constantly climbed up and down to walk past a single block, navigating a physical terrain that changed weekly. The sensory environment was a mixture of deafening noise, the constant shouting of foremen, the clatter of horse hooves on temporary wooden planks, the creak of iron screws, and the thick, pervasive smell of wet clay and coal smoke. Diaries from this era describe this transition as a deeply disorienting experience. A resident might leave their home in the morning by stepping onto a paved street, only to return in the evening and find the street elevated several feet, requiring them to climb a temporary wooden ladder to reach their second-story window. This physical fragmentation revealed a deeper, financial and legal division that left a permanent mark on Chicago's landscape. The city's municipal government agreed to pay for the raising of the public streets, filling the right-of-way with gravel, sand, and lake silt. But they drew a sharp legal line at the property boundary. The space between the new, raised street wall and the actual building facades, the sidewalk zone, was left entirely empty. Property owners were forced to bridge this gap themselves. Wealthy commercial landowners built elegant stone and brick retaining walls, capping the empty space with iron beams and concrete to form new, elevated sidewalks. But poorer immigrant families and small-scale landlords living in wooden tenements could not afford the immense cost of lifting their homes. For many of these residents, the first floors of their houses were simply buried when the streets were filled, forcing them to convert their original living rooms and kitchens into dark, damp basements, or to abandon their lower levels entirely. The properties that were lifted left behind a massive network of hollow cavities beneath the new sidewalks. Rather than filling these voids with solid earth, property owners kept them open to use as coal storage, utility vaults, or secret subterranean corridors, creating the hollow sidewalk vaults that still run beneath the modern loop. They were the physical residue of a private-public compromise, a spatial loophole where the city built the elevated platform of the street, and the property owners built a hollow bridge of sidewalks to meet it. Tax rolls and court records from the late 1850s reveal the heavy financial toll of this compromise, as smaller merchants who could not afford the cost of the lift were forced to sell their properties to larger land speculators. The raising of Chicago was still an ongoing struggle when the night of October 8, 1871, changed everything. The Great Chicago Fire swept through the city, destroying over 17,000 buildings in a matter of 36 hours. The fire fed on the city's wooden infrastructure, and as the flames raced through the central business district, they consumed the temporary wooden sidewalks, exposing the hollow vaults and subterranean chambers beneath to the open sky. The destruction was catastrophic, but in the ashes of the old wooden city, planners saw an unprecedented opportunity to finalize the elevation project once and for all. When the reconstruction began, the city did not lower the grade back to the original prairie level. Instead, builders used the millions of tons of brick and stone rubble left behind by the burned buildings to fill in the remaining low-lying lots and hollow spaces. The city passed strict new building codes outlawing wooden construction in the central district and requiring uniform, fireproof concrete sidewalks. The old, mismatched, multi-tiered streetscape was systematically swept away, replaced by the flat, orderly concrete grid we navigate today. The rubble of the disaster was literally paved over, sealing the remnants of the pre-fire city, along with the original ground level, in absolute darkness. The physical evidence of this post-fire reconstruction can still be found in the soil profiles of downtown Chicago. When modern excavation crews dig foundations for new skyscrapers, they consistently find a dense layer of ash, fused glass, and crushed brick sitting several feet below the pavement. The fire did not create the raised city, it finalized it, transforming a chaotic engineering campaign into a permanent, uniform municipal platform. Today, when you walk through the loop, you are standing on that platform. The ground beneath your feet is not the natural earth. It is an artificial shelf, a hollow ceiling suspended over the marshy soil of 1850. The lower levels of the city, like Lower Wacker Drive, and the quiet, dusty vaults behind basement walls, are the living monuments to a time when Chicago had to physically lift itself to survive. This history reframes our understanding of the modern urban landscape. We tend to view our cities as permanent monuments built from grand aesthetic designs. But Chicago teaches us that the physical layout of our daily lives is often the residue of rapid, desperate emergency patches made to escape disease and ecological collapse. The buried windows of LaSalle Street are not the artifacts of a forgotten conspiracy or a vanished ancient civilization. They are the physical records of human adaptability and compromise. They remind us that the cities we inhabit are not static structures, but living, shifting organisms that we must constantly adapt to the natural world. If we look closely at the gaps in our pavements and the anomalies in our architecture, we can still hear the creaks of the iron screws and see the outlines of the city that lifted itself out of the mud. When you look down through a sidewalk grate and catch a glimpse of an ornate window frame buried in the dark, you are looking at the boundary line between our world and the world of our ancestors, a physical monument to a moment when humanity refused to let the earth swallow them whole. When we walk down the bustling avenues of our modern cities, are we walking on the natural earth? Or are we merely standing on a platform built to escape a crisis we chose to bury rather than truly solve? If the physical layout of our greatest metropolis was decided not by grand aesthetic visions but by the immediate, desperate economics of mud and waste, what other modern systems are we living inside that were designed purely as emergency patches? Does the true history of our cities live in the proud monuments we raise into the sky, or does it wait silently in the dark, hollow spaces beneath our feet?